Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm particularly pleased to be here this afternoon because many years ago I was a student here. I actually lived in Hester's Way and was in our school for about 5 years. So it was the start of my working life from here. And today I'm starting a new phase in my working life, which is getting involved in politics in an active way for the first time. One of the things that I think is really important is that we should participate. The definition of freedom, the definition is to be able to participate and to influence. So I echo what your teachers were saying earlier. This is important for you to get to know us and to think for yourselves about what you hear and what you think is worth voting for. I've been a Cheltenham girl all my life, worked here, lived here. So this town is very close to my heart, but I've not been involved actively in politics before. One of the things that I would say to you is very much that I feel one of the reasons I'm involved in politics is because politics has become narrow. When I was younger, there were quite distinct differences between political parties, which no longer seem to exist. And certainly, many of the parties that you will be able to vote for will have a particular philosophy and ideology. There'll be differences around the periphery, but the main objectives will remain the same. In UKIP, we're actually saying it's time to bring back democracy, which actually means having real choice. After all, Russia had lots of elections, but you could only ever vote for a communist state. So we need to widen our democracy. This country has certain jobs areas where it's known that there will be jobs for the future. The government themselves have published some figures on this, some suggestions on this, particularly, for instance, in care and health. There are many other high-tech areas where it's saying there will be jobs in our economy in the future. So when you're considering what you might...
Not if you take us out of Europe, actually, you detonate the British economy.
Absolute rubbish, but we'll come back to that. What we would say is
2.5
that
million jobs at risk.
absolute rubbish again. That is such data that it's unbelievable, and it's equally rubbish by the people who put it together. What I was trying to say, if I may speak without interruption for a moment, is you need to be choosing the things that you want to study which are actually going to be relevant to the economy of the future. And high-tech, medicine, science, those sorts of things are where you will find jobs in the future, whether they're created in Cheltenham or anywhere else in our economy or even across the world. I would suggest to you that the UK taxpayer should be asking for something back for their investment in your university studies. So that's why UKIP have said that any student who wants to study medicine, science, engineering, IT, those will be absolutely free. They will have no tuition fees at all. And when you come out, the quid pro quo is that you work for the British economy for something like 4 or 5 years, and then you're free to do whatever you will, wherever you will in the world. But focus on the things where you know there's growth coming in our economy when you're thinking about your future. It's not usually very popular with the voters in exchange for health or schooling, and therefore it's one of those easy ones to actually strip the budget from. But the question is very, very valid. We are facing a threat which is almost unknown in quantity. We just don't know how it's going to hit us and where from. So I'd agree with some of my colleagues here who've actually said we need more intelligence-led, as it were, military toughness. But the other part of it is increasingly we are being asked as a nation, and volunteering even, to get involved in foreign adventures. And some of those things mean that we have to put people on the ground. You can use smartphones and all sorts of clever technology, but ultimately, many of our senior military people have said it's down to needing a certain number of troops because some of our people have been doing excessively long tours of duty or more duty tours than they should normally have done in any given period. That puts strain and stress on them, which is unfair. So I think, yes, we owe the duty to the military. One of the things UKIP wants to do is to restore that military covenant, which actually says we will look after the people who are looking after us. But I think there is enough key there. And I think one of the things that we ought to be looking at is the security of our own borders here. And that's something which our current government and the one before have dismally failed to do. And so that, I'm afraid, is giving us more grief than we might otherwise have. So yeah, I take the point of this question. We are under a severe threat, and it's down to all of us to try and manage that threat by involving and including our society as one society and not a fragmented one.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised Christina hasn't actually pointed out that the UKIP policy is to quite significantly increase spending on defence. And that, of course, in a situation where all the political parties just about want to carry on trying to balance our books. We're still overspending in government. We're still spending more than we're actually raising, by about £100 billion a year. That would inevitably mean, from UKIP, cuts in the NHS, it would mean cuts in local council services, it would mean cuts in schools. So you can't have your cake and eat it, I'm afraid. And Alex was doing a little bit of smoke and mirrors here, because actually George Osborne, the Conservative Chancellor, has published his forward spending plans, and they accept that that's going to be the case, that actually defence spending as a percentage of GDP will have to fall. The 60,000 in the question, the reduction in the armed forces, that's actually a reduction in regular troops. We are trying to balance that, and we've been trying to balance that as a coalition government by recruiting massively more reserve soldiers and making the reserves part of the army in a much more organised way than before. And that's partly about having a more responsive army and a more responsive armed forces to the kind of threats that we are seeing at the moment. And I agree with the others that that isn't just about boots on the ground. And in fact, if you look at the Iraq War, we had a massive intervention in what was actually at the time a peaceful country, allegedly to try and stop threats to this country. But actually, by the time we've come out of it, what are we left with now? We've got a massively bigger insurgency from ISIS, who are going around burning people alive, murdering people, targeting Christian and other minorities. So we've ended up within a worse situation, and actually what we need to do is build stability overseas. We need to invest in things like overseas development, actually, to try and increase prosperity and tolerance in these countries as well. And absolutely right, invest in...
I can see the logic of centralising specialisms in one area or another for clinical excellence reasons, but not A&E, because A&E is by definition not something that you can anticipate and plan for. Is it about privatisation of the NHS? Arguably, the Labour government presided over the biggest privatisation of the NHS through the Private Finance Initiative, PFI. So many contracts were issued which are going to be costing all of us, all of you particularly, a lot of money over the next generation. And unfortunately, we won't even own the buildings at the end of it. They will belong still to the people who built them, and we'll still be paying rent on them. So we are in a bit of a cleft stick there. One of the things UKIP has said is we want, where possible, locally, if it's feasible, to buy back these PFIs so that we take back the ownership into the public domain. That's something that we feel quite clearly and quite definite about. One of the other things I want to knock on the head before anybody else may raise this issue, we have never suggested that people should have to pay to go and see their GP. And we have never suggested that the services, whomsoever may deliver them, should be paid for. They should always be free for people who need to use them at the point of need. So there is no question that we are intending at all to privatise the NHS. In fact, we'd like to reverse some of that which has gone before, if it's at all feasible to do so. I agree, we need our A&E back, and I would hopefully, there's so much campaigning going on, hopefully somebody will listen, but I wouldn't guarantee it.
And yet, Nigel Farage, who's the leader of UKIP, said that we should consider a private insurance model to replace the current NHS funding model, and the logic of UKIP policies is to spend less overall, more on defence, and therefore, logically, it must mean less on the NHS and on
well, if I may interrupt you, Martin, as you interrupted me, Nigel has said we want to put 3 £3 billion into the NHS just to help it out of the hole it's in at the moment, which is actually more than half. I agree with some of the things Richard's been saying, of course, but I think one of the things we have to recognise is the fact that England is the most densely populated country in Europe. One of the reasons that we're having pressures on our services is because we have had a large number of people arriving in a very short period of time. So it's impossible for the infrastructure to keep up with it. One of the reasons I think we should have a points-based entry system is because it is fairer. At the moment, the system we have, as Richard said, is the two-tier system. If you happen to have a European passport, and some countries have been selling those passports to people who are not of their own origin, those people have the right to come here and work and live without any qualification whatsoever. If you happen to be from India, Pakistan, Australia, anywhere else in the world, you can't come here without having some method of showing how you're going to support yourself, what you're going to do when you get here. It seems to me it's grossly unfair to discriminate against 3/4 of the world coming here when the other bit of the world, that bit which is in Europe, can actually turn up whenever and however they wish. We need to manage our borders for several reasons. First and foremost, we need to manage the numbers of people coming here so that we can properly welcome them, actually give them the support they need and the services that when they get here they're reasonably entitled to having provided. But we need to plan for that. You cannot plan for that down the line and have unlimited immigration from anywhere that chooses to come here. So a point system is fairer to everybody. And I would say we're better off outside of the European Union because the European Union have made it quite clear, Mrs. Merkel very clearly said, she's not going to renegotiate the free movement of peoples. And that's what we're talking about.